Good morning, everyone. I guess we can get started. It's a pleasure to have you here. Welcome to the second day of our workshop on the evaluation of digitalization and the digitalization of evaluation. My name is Alexander Cox. I'm one of the two leaders of the working group, ES working group on method and designs. And I'm an evaluator and team leader at the German Institute for Development Evaluation. I have the honor to moderate the first two sessions this morning, and we start with a very interesting presentation titled Using Big Data for EU Programs Evaluation, Challenges and Lessons Learned on ERDF and CF Monitoring Data. ERDF is the European Regional Development Fund, and CF means Cohesion Fund. The paper is provided by Silvia Vinetti and Alessandra Caputo. Both are working for CSIL, an economic research company and a think tank based in Milano, providing evaluation and policy analysis, industrial studies, and foresight, as well as market research. So I'm very happy to have you here. Both, let me briefly introduce you. Sylvia is a member of the board of directors at CSIL. She's specialized in regional development and EU cohesion policy with a long track of record of study and evaluation assignments, and has over 20 years of experience in designing, planning, and evaluating infrastructure investments and cost-benefit analysis. Alessandra Caputo is also a partner at CSIL and senior researcher. She is specialized in statistical and econometric analysis and big data management, and has experience in combining machine learning and automated data mining techniques with more manual techniques to evaluate EU policies. So we are very excited to listen to your presentation. The floor is yours. You can share the desk.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for this invitation and for this introduction. I will say a few words at the beginning just to set the scene, and then I will leave to my colleague Alessandra. Today we will tell you a story about an experience that we had recently on a project that was carried out on behalf of the European Commission, the Directorate General of Regional and Urban Policy. If you go, Alessandra, to the next, this is the outline. So the idea is that we will show briefly what the setting of the study was, and then we will very practically drive you along our journey and the challenges that we had to face when managing this demanding project from a point of view of data collection and then processing. So the specificity of this study stems from the unique feature, so to say, or the peculiarity of the European cohesion policy, which is delivered in a shared management system. So it's one of the most important EU policies, worth 1/3 of the EU budget, overall EU budget. And it's delivered in a system where the Commission and the Member States share the responsibility of the design and implementation of a program. This means that the information about what is funded and where is again shared between the Commission and the managing authorities on the ground. So for the purpose of the ex post evaluation of 1420 programs funded by the ERDF and the Cohesion Fund, the Commission wanted to ensure that a good evidence basis was available to all the evaluators. So for these reasons, we were asked to collect from each managing authorities managing operational programs on the ground, to share with us all the information on projects and beneficiaries that were stored into their monitoring systems. The monitoring systems are information data storage and information systems that are managed in an independent way by all the regional and national authorities in all the member states and the UK, in order to monitor, but also manage the payment and the control and audit track of the EU funds. Each and every monitoring system has been put in place by the managing authorities in an independent way according to their specific administrative and payment processes. So they are one independent from the other. They're just a minimum set of data that by regulation they have to store and collect. And then they report back to the Commission, aggregating this data along a number of categories that are requested by the Commission. But the point is that the Commission has no information about project and beneficiaries that are funded on the ground. So for this reason, the Commission asked us to knock at the doors of more than 300 different managing authorities in all the EU member states for all the programs that were funded in the 14-20 period, both cooperation programs and operational programs, asking to give us whatever they had into the monitoring system at the most granular possible level. And our task was to put everything together in a way that was that could enable the aggregation and the comparability of data. So you see here the wide scope of this data collection. Basically, the idea was to have a full coverage of all the programs and providing all the evaluators this huge set of data. Now, this is precisely what we have been doing with a lot of challenges, of course, in how things had to be put together, clean, harmonized, and ensure consistency. So how we did that, this is something that Alessandra will show you, because she's the real hero of this story. Without her and her experience and skills, all this project would have not been possible. So over to you, Alessandra.
Thank you, Silvia. So indeed, I will now move ahead with the construction of the database that we did. So first of all, before going into the details, I would like to show you basically the structure of the database. So our final goal was really to have a single database collecting, as Silvia just said, information on all the projects that were funded, together with information on the beneficiaries and their final indicators, both common output indicators and program-specific indicators. So to this end, let's say that the final structure of the database that we had in mind since the real beginning was a single database built, constituted by 3 interlinked datasets, one at the operational level, one at the beneficiary level, and the third one at indicator level. So how we did that? We basically had indeed to collect raw data from the managing authorities. So we asked more than 170 managing authorities to give us, to extract and give us data that they had in their monitoring system. At the end of this data collection process, we received more than 1,000 Excel files and PDF files collecting this type of information in sometimes structured way, in other times they were really like spare file. And overall, we had for each program, so for each operational program, more than 160, 180 variables. At the end of our exercise, we had a folder of more than 300 gigabytes where we had all our raw data, and the 2 main data sets that we will present you today, so the database at the project level and the one at the beneficiary level, we collected more than 500,000 projects, so information at the project level that were basically carried out by more than 1 million beneficiaries. So we can say that we are not talking about small data. So really, we collected a large amount of data that poses many challenges, because of course we could not combine those data manually nor revise those data. So what we had to do was to revise manually the data once they were received, but then afterwards all the activities needed to clean and process the data had to be carried out in more automated way to make the entire process more efficient and especially manageable. So overall, the approach that we follow to construct a database can be structured into 3 phases. We first launched this extensive data collection to the managing authorities to collect information they had in their monitoring system. Then we had to liaise with the managing authority to ask clarification about the data that we received. And then we could start with with the core of our database construction. So we had a phase of data cleaning and harmonization to make sure that the information received were always processed in an harmonized way in order to have a database where information were indeed comparable. That is something that could not have been possible just building on their raw data. And then we fine-tune our database with the data enrichment phase, where we try to fill the gaps that we had in our database, both with information that we already had available within the database, and we will see how, as well as we enrich our database with external data sources such as Orbis and Cordis to extract additional information on the beneficiaries, information that are usually not collected by the managing authority because it's not necessary for their reporting system. So as you can see, overall, the approach to construct a database is the same that anyone would have followed for small database. Also in terms of the activities that we followed, we start here. I mentioned just a couple of them, the most time-consuming ones, let's say, starting from coding the geolocation of project companies to make available information on where these projects were carried out, translate variables, cluster organizations, cluster projects. These are all activities that one can foresee also for small database. In our case, the difficulty was not in terms of the activities that we had to carry out, but how to carry out these activities when a database includes more than 500,000 information on projects and more than 1 million beneficiaries. So what we had to change was the how. So really try to adopt techniques that were as efficient as possible. Today, I would like to focus only on these activities, so the translation, harmonization of organization names and VATs, as well as the clustering of projects and organization, and how we managed to extract additional information from Orbis. So going ahead with the problems and solutions for each of these activities, we will compare what we would have done in a world with just a couple of projects and what we did instead with our database. Translating the variables, why this was needed? That's because having collecting data from the managing authorities monitoring system has implied that the data that we receive were all in national languages. But our final goal to have really a database that could be used for the ex-post evaluation, so where data could be compared across operational programs, we had really to translate this variable and have the entire database all in English. So instead of manually translating each single cell of our database, so for instance, the title, the abstract of the project, as well as any additional textual information, we had to set up an algorithm in Python that indeed automatized the process of searching on Google Translate a given translation. So what we did was really to automatize this process. And so within Python, we were automatically accessing Google Translate and translating each cell and then collecting this information and put it into a structured way to be entered afterwards within our final database. What we found out was that translation were not always precise. Indeed, although Google Translate has improved over time, still we had some difficulties in having precise translation, and especially when acronyms were mentioned within the text. And although this was automated, of course, was a process that in any case took us around 15 days. And this was due to the fact that although we were using algorithms and machine learning, we had to set the algorithm in a way that it was having a pause for given seconds each time in order not to crash the entire system. In terms of instead harmonizing beneficiary names, this was another really important task because, of course, the same entity, the same beneficiaries was involved in most of the cases in more than one project. But the fact that we were collecting data from the managing authority, and this applies to many other contexts, provided us with data where the same beneficiaries could have been included using slightly different names. For instance, in national language, the English version of its name. Let's think about university. University of Milan could be spelled out in our database as University of Milan, but also Milan University, or in the Italian way, Università di Milano. What we wanted to avoid was really to have the same beneficiary spelled out in different way. And this was also just as a simple example, when you have to count the number of projects where the same beneficiary was involved in, you really need to have that spelled out in the same way. Given that we had more than 1 million rows of beneficiaries in our database, we could not really manually cleaning, sorting names, search for keywords to harmonize our beneficiary's name. So what we did was to set up an algorithm, also in this case, again in Python. And we used the Levenshtein distance algorithm in order to see the distance and the similarity between each pair of names and understand to what extent two beneficiaries' names were actually referring to the same beneficiary. Even in this case, we can see that these algorithms, and so generally speaking, machine learning has really helped us, because it took us like just a couple of days to run the entire exercise. But at the same time, the activity was not fully automatized, because we had to check to what extent we can say that the threshold within the Levenshtein distance was enough to say that above that threshold, all pairs of beneficiaries had a similarity such that they could have been said that they were the same beneficiary. But in any case, without machine learning, this would not have been feasible, because it would have taken like perhaps more than 1 month to really harmonize each beneficiary name. We also try to harmonize the VAT. So saying that for each beneficiary, when the same beneficiary was included in our database, we wanted to have also information on the VAT. That is crucial information, especially when you want to extract additional information from external data sources. This can be used as a unique identifier to merge our single database with external databases. In this case, we structured the entire process in multiple steps. We first try to see within our database where data were missing, but then we set up an algorithm in Python to check the validity of each VAT code using the VIS platform, which is a platform provided by the European Commission to see whether a given VAT is valid or not within the European Commission. And we also retrieved, as mentioned, VAT codes from external database based on the names and the location of our beneficiaries. Then moving ahead, we tried to enrich our database and add additional variables. For instance, we tried to have a taxonomy of each project. Again, we had more than 500,000 projects. So instead of manually aggregating our project in Excel by looking at the categories, by looking at specificities of each project, we decided to carry out a clustering by means of the K-means algorithm. So using a bottom-up approach that automatically classify list of objects according to common features. And the same applies when we look at the beneficiaries. So our goal was really to understand the typology of the beneficiaries and cluster them along common taxonomy. For instance, understand to what extent beneficiaries were enterprise rather than local authorities, or for instance, academia, and so on and so forth. So to this end, we reviewed existing studies, we developed an ontology of potential typology of beneficiaries, and we applied that to our database by analyzing the concurrence of types and also we then looked at available taxonomies provided by managing authority to harmonize those and make them talking with our taxonomy. Even in this case, although we had an ontology and we set up a sort of rules well-defined, we had to manual check at the end of the process the extent to which our classification was correct and to what extent we had false positive and false negative. So as in machine learning, we had to carry out a sort of accuracy test of our results. Finally, as mentioned, we try to extract additional information from external databases such as Orbis and Fortis. Orbis has the advantage to have full information on companies at worldwide level. There you find information on number of employees, but also the sector where a company is active, and so on, the location of the company. So really, it's a powerful source of information to try to find additional information at company level. But on the other hand, it has not possibility to gain information through the API codes. So there we had to use the batch search tool of Orbis, so search information using the name, the country, the VAT, and the city of each company. And in this sense, this took us about 20 working days to search our beneficiaries. Of course, we search only enterprises, so exploiting the results of our taxonomy at beneficiary level. And what we observed here is that actually the coverage in Orbis is really heterogeneous depending on the country you're looking at. We had in some cases countries where we were able to find almost all the beneficiaries we have in our database, while in other cases we have a lower coverage rate. To conclude, what we have found out with our exercise has been that the digitalization of administrative process makes available really an increasing amount of data that can be used for evaluation purposes that are really interesting and really heterogeneous. As evaluators, in order to exploit all these data in the most efficient way, we have to think out of the box, and perhaps we have to keep collaborating with data scientists to see really to what extent machine learning and artificial intelligence can support in analyzing this data, but not only analyzing, also really in pre-processing this data to set up afterwards the evaluation. Anyway, although machine learning algorithms are really powerful and allows us to make the process more efficient, as we have seen with our process, with our study, human intelligence and in any case, manual procedures are still really important. So we found out that we could not really rely fully on our algorithm, but some manual checks were always needed, especially because you need a better understanding of the data informative potential and to really understand what is behind the data. That is something that only us can do. So we need to understand the trade-off between manual cleaning, more manual techniques and machine learning techniques to exploit the full potential of our data. And I would conclude here and open now the discussion.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Silvia and Alessandra, for this very interesting presentation. And it's really impressive how you had to handle with this huge amount of data and how you managed to harmonize a huge database. So I think we can learn a lot from this straightforward approach. And so I would like to invite the audience to join us. We have around 6 more minutes. So please just post your comments and questions in the chat. I can read it for you. So here's one from Liliana. Thanks for the presentation, concise and clear. Congrats. Could you please indicate the volume of work, person days and months to create this database?
Yeah, perhaps I can reply to this. Indeed, this was a very huge teamwork. So in addition, we had a core team of a relatively small number of persons internally doing the data crunching. It was Alessandra, Francesca, I mean, let's say 2-3 people working. Alessandra, how much full-time for, I think, if not 1 year, almost.
Yeah.
But then the most of the work was also, I mean, not most, but a lot of work was also done by country experts, because the problem was that we had to engage in a close interaction with managing authorities on the ground. So we had to send emails, ask to provide the data, and in some cases also be back to the authorities to understand what was behind the data. Because when you receive huge amount of Excel files with data on payment tranches, on types of project, it's not always straightforward to understand what has to be put together with what. So we had an extensive network of country experts of almost 50 people, going to each and every managing authority in all the member states. In Italy, for example, we have up to 40 different administrations that were engaged. And so we had to dialogue with them. So it was a great effort. Alessandra, I don't know whether you want to add something.
No, indeed, it was really a team work done at different level, combining, as you mentioned, like relation back and forward with the managing authorities on the one hand, especially because to apply algorithms, we really had to be sure of what we were managing and what was behind.
Perfect. Thanks a lot. Then we have one more comment from Daniel. Not really a question, but just a big thank you and congrats. As Silvia knows, I'm involved in one of the evaluation studies that is making use of all the data you have collected and analyzed. So I really appreciate the enormous effort and that has gone into your work. Okay, just a thank you, so to say. Anyone else? Questions? There's one from Marco. Did you have any difficulty in letting the client understand the complexity of the work and the resources needed to do this, and in convincing them paying for this? Nice question.
Thank you, Marco, for this question, and nice to see you here. The client was convinced of the usefulness of this exercise. It was the client deciding to promote this project. But indeed, it was very difficult for us to explain them each and every problem that we encountered, also the possible limitations, and also how some data had to be interpreted. Some of the picture that emerged in some cases was not as expected from their side. But when you put all the information together and then you do even some simple statistics and you compare what you have in the new database with the information system that they had in place, which was working with different data flows, things were not fully comparable all the times. And this was difficult to explain and difficult also to interpret for us. So it took us a lot of time and also thinking and understanding. So yes, it was difficult to explain, but they were totally convinced at the beginning about the utility of this exercise.
Mm-hmm. So we have 2 more questions and 1 minute left. So let me just present the 2 and then you can stick to it maybe in 1 minute. Otto is asking whether the database is public available, and Kai is coming up with a more technical question. So he's asking if there were any variables and indicators you couldn't fix, how much imputation you needed for missing data.
Perhaps I can take the question on whether this is public. The dataset is publicly available. I will post the link in the chat as soon as I can retrieve it. And on the things that we couldn't fix, perhaps Alessandra can provide some example of the most challenging.
Yeah. So I think the most challenging one were on the expenditure data, because there you have really that each monitoring system is focusing on perhaps public expenditure rather than the total expenditure in different way because of the how the operational program is fixed and where you have that the co-financing rate needs to be applied to. So in some case, the financing rate is applied to public expenditure only. So then in the monitoring system, you have more information on that, and the opposite applies as well. So I would say that for the expenditure data is where we had more discrepancies among the DOPs in the raw data. Afterwards, after liaising with the managing authority, we managed to really fill many gaps because you have many cases where, although they talk about public expenditure, you find that given the operational program, public and total are basically the same one in terms of eligible expenditure. So we managed in this way to fix it. But I would say that while for the geolocation that at the real beginning, we thought would have been the most difficult variables because of the way they were collecting it. So in some cases, we have postal codes, in others, we have the full address. There we did a huge effort to increase the coverage. At the end, you have that is missing for less than 1%. The NATS2 level, for instance, is missing for less than 1%. For the expenditure, it was a bit more difficult. So there you have perhaps more gaps, especially at the beneficiary level. That's because as it is the monitoring system itself, in most of the case, you have information only for the leader. Whereas for the project, for the information at project level, even there, we managed to fill almost all the gaps. But yeah, I would say that expenditure data at the beneficiary level disaggregated for each partner in case of collaborative project was the most difficult variable because it is not collected by many managing authorities because not needed.
Perfect. Many thanks again, Alessandra and Silvia.